Jupiter line on a high vibration is this like expansive, lucky, because it's a great benefic. So when you're on a Jupiter line, especially for you, because you're a Sag rising, it's really about this like expansion of spirituality and teaching and learning. So when you're in an area with a Jupiter line, like you just feel like things are flowy. You feel like things are really like in beat with who you are, especially for you, because that's like really the essence of who you are. So yeah, Jupiter lines can feel really relaxing and they can feel great and expansive. And sometimes when you're on a Jupiter line, like you get good news. Like, hey, oh my gosh, I got this phone call from a friend and it's a networking opportunity. So just things can happen like easier for you, I'd say.
I love that. And it's so funny because this summer, the two places that I was called to live, I'm like, where should I live? Lisbon or London? And they just both started coming through. And then I found out both of them, my Jupiter runs right through them. So it's like my soul just knew.
Yes. And I see that all the time. People will be like, why am I so drawn to Australia? I used to have like videos and pictures growing up. I was like so obsessed with it. And sure enough, it's a Jupiter or North Node line. So people are naturally intuitively drawn to the places where they have lines.
What are the shadows of being on your Jupiter line?
So Jupiter line, it's all about like the excess. So you could do things in excess, like too much, like you can overdo it. But also I find sometimes on Jupiter lines, like people are like, the grass is greener. You're like looking at other things, being like, like, I don't know if that really feels good or that. So it can sometimes like, you can overthink the greatness, if that makes sense. Like you can get in your shadow a little bit of maybe overthinking opportunities or maybe overspending, things like that can happen.
So would you say Jupiter is mostly career related or it's just luck overall?
So it so depends on what line you're on. So I forgot what your Jupiter, what was in Lisbon, if it was an ascendant or descendant. Do you remember? So if you're on a Jupiter midheaven, that's going to be really career-based. But I think in general, it's really about these like great lessons and spiritual teachings that you learn on a Jupiter. But it's just good vibes, like all around.
Great. We love a Jupiter.
Yeah.
So what about the Venus line?
So Venus line actually can do really good things with money. So sometimes I tell people to buy real estate on Venus lines or Saturn lines too. You can buy long-term real estate, but also Venus is that Venusian quality of just aesthetics. So like what makes you feel like yourself, you know, like what makes you feel lovely and excited and like truly the matters of morals and values, like that kind of stuff. So I always tell people to buy things on Venus lines, because that's like, I don't know.
Sounds like it has a strong Taurus energy.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Taurus and Libra energy, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because one would assume Venus is just about love, you know, but it's not. It's also the prosperity, the abundance, the Lakshmi piece.
Yes. And I think that's a common misconception because people say like, oh, do I just find love on a Venus line? And like, you totally can find love in a Venus line, but it's more about the self-love that radiates through. And buying things, like material things, like sometimes people like to go, it could be an excess too, but sometimes people like to buy like clothes or wardrobe or, you know, like things that make you pop, like your eye makeup or things like that can really be expressed on a Venus line.
Fascinating. And what are the shadows? It's the excess.
More excess things. Sometimes you can get in the shadow of like not feeling truly in love with yourself. So you can feel, I don't know, like past relationship stuff can come up on a Venus line. You can overspend again too. This is pretty generic because where Venus is in your chart will give me a lot more information. So wherever your Venus is in the zodiac sign and then where Venus is sitting in the house will give me a little more clue. So this is more of just like a general sweeping thing. But when I really look at a Venus in someone's chart, I'm like, this is how it's going to manifest for you, if that makes sense.
Got it. Okay, what is the Saturn line?
So Saturn line is that big teacher. Sometimes Saturn line can be a little bit of like a hard or isolating. Sometimes you might feel lonely. When I traveled to my Saturn line, I instantly, there was a tornado. I had to shelter in place. I was like, what the heck?
Where was your Saturn line?
It was outside of Nashville. What was crazy though is in Nashville, I was on a Uranus and then I traveled, like my girlfriend had a lake house and we went to the Saturn line. I didn't realize I was going to be close to the Saturn. And the second we got there, like a tree almost fell on the house.
Wait, just an hour drive away?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because in my birth chart, they're conjunct, so they were close by. So anyway, but on the high vibration, Saturn lines, I think we found this in your chart, like good for where you went to university or school. So, or I tell people to buy cars on Saturn lines because it's long-term success. So if you really want to like plan this career or long-term business or long-term relationships or home or family, people go to Saturn lines to kind of build those foundations.
Got it. Okay. So it has that seriousness, that foundation. And is there anything about relationships there? I feel like I saw some.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what line it is, sometimes you can build like long-term friendships forever on Saturn lines. Saturn lines are really good for manifesting anything you want. Like Jupiter is great for short-term manifestations, but Saturn is like, I'm really planting these seeds and I'm going to see them through to the bitter end. Like that's good for Saturn lines.
It's Capricorn energy.
100%. Exactly, because Capricorn is led by Saturn.
Yeah, I was on my Saturn line. I mean, I guess Boston was. So I was just like, study. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes it can just feel like you're putting your head down and you're doing that. Whereas like a Jupiter, like you're like, oh my gosh, every day is a new opportunity. So they're both good for career or manifestation, but in different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about our moon line?
So moon line is like a hug. When you're on a moon line, it's your safety and it's what makes you feel like emotionally secure. I also love moon lines for like retreats or things where you're with other women because it's very feminine. Your intuition is heightened and sharpened. So yeah, just depending on what aspect of the moon, I channel like crazy
Feminine energy.
Feminine, yeah, but it's more of like receptive. So when you go there, it's like, oh, I'm seeing like light in people, or I'm connecting with a stranger on the street. It's like this very like altruistic, like lovely energy.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's funny because you asked me about my moon places and I feel like I haven't even gone to any of them.
I know.
I need to check them out because all of my spiritual centers are on my Mercury lines.
Yes.
Let's talk about Mercury.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
That's why I love like everyone's chart is so different. But you were like, wait a second, every single Mercury place you
My
went
Mercury lines are like Bali and Thailand and Peru and Hawaii and like the world's spiritual hubs are where I get my downloads. And because I am a channel. That's how my spiritual practice is. So it makes sense that my soul would choose the most spiritual places on earth for my communication and downloads.
Yes, I loved that too, because also like you are a teacher and you're a guide. And so having that Mercury is where your intellectual, mind starts running. So on Mercury lines in the high vibration, it's really that network, that connecting, that divine download, especially for you. And then I always like to tell people on Mercury lines, like to study, to learn, to network, to have fun, to go out and like really be active in your body. Otherwise, sometimes on a Mercury line, you can be so busy up in your head, it's not channeled through your body. So I see people on Mercury lines get a little anxious or get a little like high strung or feel that frenetic energy that Mercury is so good for, but it can be like, oh, this is too much. So that's why those spiritual places for you are so in alignment. Like that's amazing that when you're there, you're like, oh, okay, tapping in.
I'm like, I'm going to write a book.
Right, exactly. And that's like so, Mercury for sure.
Yeah, it's funny because you said you did not resonate with your Mercury.
No, my Mercury, I felt a little more anxious. I'm naturally an anxious person. That's also in my birth chart. But on a Mercury line, yeah, I felt like that frenetic energy. And I wish I would have, channeled writing or singing or doing something that was like really using those gifts. But I think now I would just like network and like lean into the social media or the podcasting or things like that. Like that would be easier to express the Mercury lines.
Right. It's like we have these energies. It's what do we make of them?
100%.